Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
The largest union talk radio program in the South. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller, but he's out of the office today for a good reason. We've got our phones open. You can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Appreciate everybody that's already hanging out with us today. We got a cool username in the TikTok chat. Bob, your union paralysis demon. Appreciate everybody for hanging out. We got a couple of folks in the YouTube chat. Journey to Insight says, good morning. Great topic, guys. He's talking about there, the topic that we featured in our thumbnail and the title of the stream. We're going to be talking about that at about 11:15 a.m. Central Time. So here in about an hour and a half, it's in the second half of the program. But we're going to be talking to some building trades union folks about data centers. That has been just such a huge topic of conversation, and I think that there's a little bit of nuance that we can inject into the topic. So it's not all bad. Some bad, no doubt, but not all bad. Adam is out today because he is going down to Montgomery with thousands of other working people from across the country to protest the Republicans' attempt to decimate black political power, particularly across the South, and including right here in Alabama. We have a voicemail from him talking about why he went down there. Let's play clip 5.
Hey y'all, Adam Keller here. Sorry I couldn't be in studio today, but like thousands of other folks, I am on my way to Montgomery, Alabama. In light of the Supreme Court's gutting of the Voting Rights Act, civil and voting rights groups are organizing a grassroots national day of action on today, Saturday, May 16th. It's going to start at 9 a.m. in Selma with faith leaders gathering at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And there's going to be a national mass rally at the state capitol from 1 to 5 p.m. this afternoon in Montgomery. So I'm excited to go down with fellow labor union members. The AFL-CIO has endorsed this day of action. I know that American Federation of Teachers, Federal Unionist Network, FUN, as well as several other labor organizations have endorsed the call. There's going to be a lot of folks in town. And it's really going to be a public display of our protest and our power because we have fought too hard for voting rights for everybody in this state and this country, and we can't afford to move backwards. We're moving backwards in so many respects, from our labor rights to our civil rights to our voting rights to our women's rights, you name it. We can't afford to go backwards. It's time to organize and come together. So I'm really excited to be joining folks in Montgomery. We look forward to what comes next. Solidarity forever, y'all.
Another friend of the show, Whitney, is on her way down to Montgomery. She called in talking about why she's going down. Let's play clip 6.
Hey, this is Whitney Washington. I'm Vice President of the North Alabama Area Labor Council, and I am actually on my way to Montgomery right now. And today I'm going to Montgomery because I realize that this, what's been happening at the Supreme Court and at state legislatures is a huge setback to the working people of the whole country, but especially Black working class Southerners. It's really unfair, and I hate to admit, but I think I was really arrogant about specifically voting rights. We've seen, our elections sort of become a joke, especially in Alabama, where people just run unopposed for decades. We have a really weak, opposition to that. And I, just sort of assumed like the voting rights was safe because it's, the elections here are so ineffective anyway. And they obviously aren't. And seeing what happened at the legislature has really proven how serious this issue is. And, we're going to need everyone on deck, every race and class and, political point of view. We all need to be fighting this because if they are coming for my rights today, they will be coming for yours tomorrow. So I'm excited to see what happens in Montgomery, and best of luck to everyone who's been organizing this.
If you would like to get where she was, you can call in. The phone lines are open right now, 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can leave us a voicemail at any time. If you went down to the rally and you're hearing this after we're live, we'd love to hear from you about why you went via voicemail. We have somebody on the line. I believe I know who this is, calling from a 205 area code. Let's go ahead and bring them on the air. 205 area code, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Listen, if it's 205, you already know we are live from the great state of Alabama. Y'all make some noise!
Wow. So this is...
Listen, this is... You know what? And I'm not even going to say my name because this is a movement. We are here. All roads lead to the South. We got folks all the way from Florida, California is here, Tennessee, Mobile, Georgia, Louisiana, St. Louis, Montgomery. Listen, because we know so goes the South, so goes this nation, and we are here in defense of voting rights. Right, we are here in defense of fair representation. We are here for fair maps, right? And so we are excited about the opportunity that we have today. We know that the moral moment in Selma has already started. You have hundreds of faith leaders and community members that are praying, that are covering this movement, that God will go before us. We know the role that faith has played in our movement space. And then right after the moral moment, everybody is making their way to the great city of Montgomery. We are going to be right in front of the Alabama State Capitol. Y'all ready to throw down, to get down? Absolutely. As we speak to this moment and we speak to the criticality of representation, not just here in the state of Alabama, but also in places like Tennessee. I'm going to throw it to my good sister, Amber Sherman, who has also been on the front lines. How are you feeling about being in the dirty, dirty South?
I'm excited to be here. It's time to activate folks. We know that our voting rights are under attack, and we're bringing folks all to one place so we can get everyone activated and go back out to their communities and activate more voters and get them out to the polls.
Absolutely. And the beautiful thing about this movement is it is comprised of more than 160 national, local organizations that have come together and to say we're not going back, but we're moving forward towards towards progress, and towards freedom. And one of the organizations that we have here is NCNW. Y'all make some noise. The National Council of Negro Women. So I'm here with the team right now. Why are you all here, and why is this moment so important?
This moment is so important right now because this is not politics. This is not political. This is our livelihood, and this impacts all people, not just Black people. And we understand that representation means everything. They thought this was a wound that they were doing, but we are turning it into our weapon. And so wound into weapon, and we will fight. And that is why NCNW and all of these organizations are here, because we are ready to continue the fight.
Yes. Look, I got a question for the 100+ people in the room. When voting rights are under attack, what do we do? When voting rights are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
Listen, last check-in, the ACLU of Alabama is also here live and in color. My good brother, Steven, listen, my brother from another mother. Why are you here, and what does this moment mean for our country?
We're here to stand alongside our brothers and sisters in the South and make sure that we are fighting as hard as we can for fair maps, and to ensure that for future generations that everyone is able to have their voice heard, their vote counted, and the representation that everyone deserves every single day.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, y'all show some love for Steven. So look, we about to head out because we're about to get in place. We have thousands of people who are on the way to stand in solidarity with us. We know that there are satellite events that are also happening all across the country as well. And so we're grateful for people who are in North Carolina. I think there's an action today happening in Alaska as well. Yeah, listen, we ain't playing, okay? If folks gonna try to make us uncomfortable, we gonna make them real uncomfortable as well. Yes, absolutely. And so we know that we're going to fight, and we also know that we're going to win. And so shout out to all of the labor groups, union groups, that are joining us as well, because we know that all of our freedoms are tied together. So thank you all so much for this opportunity. All roads lead to the South, starting right now. It's been that way, but we really about to show the world on today that the South has something to say. Y'all got something to say? Make some noise. There it is. Thank y'all. Love you.
Thank you. Love you too. Thank you so much for taking the time to call in. I really appreciate it, and wishing y'all the best of luck, and really appreciate everything that y'all are doing down there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yep. Yeah, really glad that worked out. We were planning to talk to her yesterday, doing a pre-taped conversation, and I think it worked out a little bit better that we were able to have them call in live and have so many people on the have so many of the volunteers talk about why they were doing this. I mean, that's so cool being able to have a small part in this, and have a bunch of our friends and comrades down there. Really excited to see how this day unfolds. We do have another caller on the line. I'm assuming it's about the same topic. If you want to get where she was and where all of those volunteers were, you can give us a call, 844-899-TVLR. This one is from a 256 area code. Dwayne, thanks for calling in. What's on your mind?
Hey, Jacob. Well, I've been researching this whole three-judge panel and what they decided, which is very important. I even talked about it a little bit on Dale Jackson's show yesterday, the other day. And here's what everybody needs to know. The three-judge Republican, one of them appointed by Trump panel, they use what's called the Arlington Heights test to determine if there's 14th Amendment violations, okay? And back in 2023, one of the senators down at the Gulf Coast did not want any move over of voters from the Mobile area to come into his, I don't know how to say it, except predominantly white district, refusing absolutely. And this is what they said was absolute. All three of them in unison said racial discrimination against blacks to go into this area. Have you got me here? Now, back in 2023, they allowed them to discuss other things instead of mapping. Have you got me, Jacob?
Right.
That means that they could put up there whatever they wanted to. Well, this same senator wanted to use a whole lot of debate time where they could draw a map other than his that completely protected his district, and he took up all the time he could, and guess what that was? That was where the History and Archives guy, Richard, I can't think of his last name, had a luncheon about LGBTQ, just how they contributed to the state of Alabama. And he wanted to punish them for having had this luncheon that cost the state and taxpayers nothing. Right. He wanted to reduce their budget by $5 million. And he took up all the time to do that. You get me? That could have been used for the mapping, to change the mapping where he denied any black representation be moved over to the rest of the Gulf Coast from Mobile. Now, nobody seems to be talking about this, but they were really upset, the three judges. And they were really upset because at the last minute, and you can look up all this on AI, okay? They came forth and said, we're not going to follow any of your request of what you want us to do about your mapping. We're going to wait on the Louisiana decision. And boy, that made those three judges in 11th District really mad, okay? And the Louisiana decision really is not the thing here, because there wasn't any black discrimination taking place in Calais. Have you got me? It was, this is a whole different thing where they actually ruled that they were discriminatory, purposefully, intentionally in their mapping as legislators. So, and that whole thing at the end where they said pretty much was spitting in their face. Now, guess what, Jacob? The very same senator is the first one to put up SB 1 and want the congressional map to be also the same one from 2023 that does not change his district. Have you got me here? So not only was he the catalyst for the other, he's the one, instead of drawing a map that would not be discriminatory to put forth that could pass, actually put forth for the same map that they didn't want to go through this time. And if you have any questions, I know a lot about it to tell you.
I mean, I don't think I have any questions. I think you explained it well there. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we let you go?
Well, just that the three judge panel does not have, they don't, Callis does not make them have to rule that way, and they can decide how they want to, and they are really upset about what these legislators did. So anybody can look up to see their ruling says intentional racism in drawing their map, and particularly has to do with the Gulf Coast around Daphne, where there's also a lot of contributors to certain persons' campaigns that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that come from that same area, which is mainly business and tourists.
Right.
Thanks for letting me get on here and say all that, Jacob.
Yep.
Carry
Thanks,
on.
Dwayne. Appreciate the call. We did have one more voicemail from somebody who was going down to Montgomery today. Let's play clip 2.
Hi, my name is Robert Lewis Hunter. I'm running for a local state house seat in Alabama. It's in Etowah County, and I'm actually headed down to the Montgomery event later on tonight, if not early in the morning tomorrow. I am just want to let y'all know thank you for your support, and I do want to let the listeners know that they're listening and advocating and fighting for more than just these congressional seats. Now, the Supreme Court has made it clear how they stand on the Voting Rights Act and parts of the Civil Rights Act. This could knock down other seats as well. A great example being my seat that I'm running for. In my seat, we're 37% African American and almost 40% minority. If I end up winning this election, what they're going to do is say, under political pretense, we have to get rid of this black legislature member because, you know, we have to ensure the conservative power, which sadly is majority white. They have to conserve and secure their white power for all intents and purposes on the political level. So this fight is more than just a fight for congressional seats. That's just today's fight. Tomorrow's fight is what it means to even be able to vote, as one of the legislature's members had said, potentially talking about dealing with the 14th Amendment and what it means to even be an American. Thank you again for listening. I hope you all have a good one.
And, you know, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, you know, some of the stations that we're on are conservative stations. And so, you know, some of the people who are hearing this are going to be, you know, in addition to a little bit triggered by, you know, people who are upset about what's going on now, they're going to have heard a lot of, you know, frankly, I think just incorrect things about kind of the state of play with respect to how gerrymandering exists. For one, you know, one of the things that I hear a lot of, you know, conservative pundits saying is that, oh, well, this isn't motivated by racism anymore. You know, maybe at one point in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, you could say that, you know, disenfranchising black folks, you know, taking away their political power, that was motivated by racism. But now it's not. Now it's motivated just by partisanship. And, you know, I'm not really going to say one way or another what that, you know, what the reality of that is. I will say, though, that I would really encourage people to check out, you know, I mean, there's really a lot of anti-black politics that are being mainstreamed on the right today. If you take a look at a recent episode of that Matt Walsh did about abolitionist John Brown, talking about it's this whole video purporting to be an expose about him and, you know, disparaging him and his character basically the whole time. And that's not at all to say that people should agree with everything that John Brown did, or, you know, which I wouldn't, right? And certainly, at the very least, you must tactically disagree with what he did, because ultimately it did not lead to the slave rebellion that he was hoping for. But all along the way, as he is trying to do this moral condemnation of John Brown, he is inserting revisionist history about the Civil War. He is, completely disparaging the abolitionist movement, not just the civil rights movement, which he does that as well, but the abolitionist movement. Talking about how the abolitionist movement was motivated in large part by anti-white resentment. And so, whether this redistricting stuff is or is not motivated by anti-black animus, you can at the very least see why so many people believe that it is, because you have these people like Matt Walsh going out there and saying things like this. Saying things like the civil rights movement and the abolitionist movement were motivated in large part by anti-white animus. Just completely absurd and racist, right? In addition to that, people will hear things like, Republicans are only doing what Democrats had already done. And again, this is just not the reality. If you take a look at 2022 and 2024, states on either side of the aisle, Republican states, Democratic states, had both engaged in gerrymandering. I think that most nationwide analyses of the state of gerrymandering would have said that even back then, Republicans held a slight edge because of how intense Republicans went in gerrymandering after 2010, after the 2010 census. And so I think that most analyses would say that Republicans held an edge there. But nevertheless, you can point to states like Massachusetts where 30% of the people voted Republican, and yet all 9 of their representatives in the House were Democrats. And you can also point to states like Oklahoma and Arkansas, where those 2 states also voted a third in favor of the Democrats, and yet all 9 of their representatives were Republicans. And there's all sorts of, there's several other states on either side that you can make similar arguments for, ironically, including Tennessee before this even more intense gerrymandering, right? Because if you look at Tennessee, they have 9 representatives, and only one of them was a Democrat. If we're just talking about partisanship, only one of them was a Democrat, where if you look at the statewide voting population, you would anticipate that 3 of the 9 representatives for Tennessee would be Democrats. And so, the state of play was already, Republicans were engaging in this and Democrats were engaging in this, but it had more or less come to a fair stalemate. Because if you look at 2022 and 2024, if you look at the national popular vote for candidates in the House of Representatives, the percentage of people that voted for Republicans, the percentage of people that voted for Democrats, it basically sort of evened out. And the number of seats that you would anticipate each party getting is basically kind of what they got. And yet, because the Trump administration saw how unpopular across the country, and again, we're on, in addition to other stations, conservative stations, and so, among listeners of conservative talk radio, a lot of you are going to love the Trump administration, owning the libs and doing things just that trigger people on the other side of the aisle. But most people across the country, normies, which you are not, kind of almost by definition, if you're listening to conservative talk radio or even progressive talk radio, you're like not a normie. You're kind of a little bit weird. It's okay to be weird, but that's who you are, right? Normies don't appreciate the fact that the economy is worse than it was 2 years ago. Inflation is higher than it was 2 years ago. Gas prices are significantly higher than they were 2 years ago. Jobs are worse. Less people are at work. Unemployment is higher. The labor force participation rate is lower. Manufacturing jobs have been cut at almost the same rate as federal government jobs, which also people losing their federal government jobs are not good either, right? And so lots of people, most people, the vast majority of people across the country are super, super unsatisfied with the job that the Trump administration is doing. And so they knew that they would lose the House of Representatives if the American people were able to vote fairly and be fairly represented in the House. And so instead of changing track, instead of trying to pursue policies that would actually help working people to increase their approval rating, instead of doing anything like that for the American people, they wanted to cheat and get more. They wanted to get more seats in the House of Representatives just by drawing different maps. They wanted to pick their voters instead of the voters picking them. And that's how this whole thing started off. And also, in contra to what you may believe, there are many more states where Democrats could increase their gerrymandering and take away Republican seats in much the same way. And by the end of 2028, by 2030, I anticipate, and most people anticipate, that we'll be back at basically a similar place with respect to gerrymandering, as far as a stalemate where neither side can go any further. It will be kind of maximal. And so then the retort might be, well, then why does it matter, Jake? Why does it matter if we're going to end up in basically a fair place anyway with respect to the partisan breakdown nationwide? Why does it matter if why do you oppose both sides going? Why do you oppose Republicans going ahead and escalating this and increasing gerrymandering? Well, I oppose it because the country, people being less represented by their representatives is a bad thing. And that's why people are going down to Montgomery to fight for fair maps. People are going down to Montgomery to fight against gerrymandering. And one of the things that a lot of people are going to be pushing for is for a partisan gerrymandering ban nationwide, which would, yes, take away several Democratic seats in places like Illinois, Massachusetts, and California, but it will also take away Republican seats in places like Texas, Florida, and Alabama. And that would be fair. And in addition to being more fair, people at the local level would be more represented in D.C., in Congress. And that is a better world. It is a better world where it is easier for the public to express their concern, their dissatisfaction with the performance of their government. It is a better world where that is easier for the public to do. It is not a good world. It is a worse world where either party is able to insulate themselves from the disapproval of their voters. That's for Democrats or Republicans. That just makes the world worse. And, call me radical, call me crazy. I want a better world. I want a world where people are able to express their disapproval in voting and for that to be meaningful. But Republicans don't. And so, we should we should take note of that. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. 844-899-8857. If you'd like to call in, and like I said, you can leave us a voicemail at any time throughout the week, and we might play it on the next program. We got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking soon to Hamilton Nolan about a new project called Union Now that we're really excited about. And we'll be talking about some more stuff as well. Union Now is the project that we're going to be talking about. It's an organization that is designed to fill in the gap between the extremely high approval ratings for unions. Something like 70% of American workers would vote yes in a union election tomorrow if they could have one. But getting to a union election is so hard that most workers will never have that opportunity. And so, by virtue of that, the increase in union density is not where you would expect it to be. I mean, union density continues to decline, and union organizing continues to be a very difficult thing to do. And so, Union Now is an organization that is that is designed to try to fill in that gap and make it easier for workers to organize. So, really excited to talk to Hamilton Nolan about that in just a moment. We're going to be right back. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. Stay tuned.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Since 1889, the National Association of Letter Carriers has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of the union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To learn more, visit NALC.org. Unite Here is also a supporter of the Valley Labor Report. They are a labor union that represents 300,000 working people across Canada and the United States. Their members work in the hotel, gaming, food service, manufacturing, textile, distribution, laundry, transportation, and airport industries. You can learn more about Unite Here at unitehere.org.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Tennessee to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We just finished up talking about the huge rally and march that'll be taking place in Montgomery today. We talked to event organizers and heard from several listeners who were going down to Montgomery today. We will soon be talking to Hamilton Nolan about a new organization designed to help workers organize. Really excited for that conversation. And we're going to be talking about more on today's show. If you would like to call in, you can do so at 844-899-TVLR. You can also send us a text at the same number or send us a written note at tvlr.fm/contact. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, tvlr.fm, but we are also on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you get your podcasts, all at The Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. A huge portion of our funding comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program or make a one-time donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. We've got a bunch of cool merch for sale at tvlr.fm/store. And finally, if you're a member of a union, you should get your local, district council, your region, or your international to sponsor the show. You can reach out to us for more details on that. And I'll add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you are on YouTube, Facebook, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WGOW, WMSP, WCPT, KTNF, Means TV, or through your favorite podcast app. We're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage all of our listeners to check that out at laborradionetwork.org. And as most of you know, we're not media professionals, just diehard unionists who want to amplify the voices of the working class in the American South, and we're hoping that this project can make a difference on that front. We can't do it without you, so we want to thank everybody for tuning in. Whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener, we appreciate you spending some time with us today. Every week in the South, workers organize new unions, they bargain new contracts, they fight for good legislation and against bad legislation, and they put the boss in their place. These are some of the stories that we could find last week from May the 9th to the 15th. This is Last Week in Southern Labor. Over the last week, not very many new union campaigns. Just 9 workers in one bargaining unit have gone public with their union campaign. 7 workers in one bargaining unit are trying to decertify their union. 82 workers across 4 bargaining units withdrew their petition for a union election. 300 workers across 7 bargaining units unionized, and about 100 workers in 2 bargaining units voted to decertify their union. In new campaigns, workers likely pushed by their employer filed a petition to decertify a union, as the union representing 7 workers at Buckeye Pipeline Services Company in Sugar Creek, Missouri, and 9 workers at the International Paper Company in Cantonment, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 1937. In election results, 90 librarians at the University of Missouri voted in an election overseen by the Missouri State Board of Mediation, since these are public sector, not private sector workers, to unionize with the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, Local 955. Local 955 already represents several groups of public sector workers in Missouri. 83 workers at the Sherwin-Williams Manufacturing Company in Birmingham, Alabama voted 35-36 in favor of decertifying the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, IBB, in a very disappointing election there. 4 workers at Professional Contract Services in Fort Sill, Oklahoma voted 3-1 in favor of unionization with the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 351. 32 workers at Pepsi Beverages in Lithonia, Georgia voted 17-10 in favor of unionization with the Teamsters, Local 528. 10 workers at Kentucky Power Company in Ashland, Kentucky voted 10-0 in favor of unionization with the IBEW, Local 978. 49 workers at CPC Retail Products in Jackson, Missouri voted 22-16 in favor of unionization with the Teamsters, Local 600. And 122 workers at Kinetic in Gainesville, Florida voted 98-24 against decertifying the Communication Workers of America, CWA. In strikes and bargaining updates, a 31% base pay raise by this summer and $750 million in back pay. That's what 30,000 flight attendants at United Airlines, who are unionized with the Association of Flight Attendants, AFA-CWA, secured in their new contract that they just ratified. In addition to that nearly immediate 31% pay raise, they will get another 12% in pay raises over the next 4 years of the contract. They were also able to secure for the first time compensation for boarding time, which the union says amounts to another 7 to 8% increase in compensation, along with 10 weeks of paid maternity leave and more. The union members ratified the contract with 82% voting in favor and nearly 90% of eligible members voting. The REI union is calling on customers to boycott the company's anniversary sale from May 15th to the 25th to increase pressure on the co-op to come to the table and bargain a fair contract with workers at the 12 locations that have unionized. The union is lambasting the company for offering lower wages to union workers than workers at non-union stores, as well as for proposing contract provisions that would prevent REI workers from unionizing and forcing REI workers to sign NDAs so that they can't discuss their working conditions. Over 300 warehouse workers at United Natural Foods Incorporated, UNFI, in Lancaster, Texas, just ratified their first union contract with the Teamsters Local 745. In the contract, they secured a 23% wage increase, a defined pension benefit plan, and more. 50 workers at the beverage market in West Virginia, the only distributor for Miller Coors products in the state, just launched an unfair labor practice strike against the company. The workers, organized with the Teamsters Local 175, say the company is bargaining in bad faith and demanding concessions. Over 1,300 New Flyer workers across the country, including in Alabama and Kentucky, just ratified a new national collective bargaining agreement that the union says includes language guaranteeing additional holidays, locked-in health care costs, clarity on seniority and transfers, better training, and stronger safety protocols. The national agreement sits on top of local agreements like the one in Anniston, Alabama, where workers won a 25% pay increase over 3 years. In political and legislative updates, the Virginia governor Abigail Spanberger, a Democrat, just betrayed her working-class base and vetoed a major pro-union bill. The bill would have given public sector workers in Virginia the right to collectively bargain, the same right that private sector workers already have. In a statement about her veto, she said that she would have liked to see changes to the bill to delay its rollout in order to, quote, demonstrate efficacy prior to full implementation, as if workers need to prove anything to a governor to secure their rights to collective bargaining. The veto comes as a shock as she appeared at an SEIU rally in support of this legislation as recently as February. The same union noted in response to this veto that the ban on public sector collective bargaining came in the 1940s following an attempt by black hospital workers to unionize in the state of Virginia. The labor movement unanimously condemned her veto, with the Virginia AFL-CIO saying that this is, quote, a devastating betrayal to the hundreds of thousands of public employees who have spent years and in many cases decades fighting for a seat at the table. It probably shouldn't come as too much of a shock, though. We covered on our program how Spanberger, a CIA spook turned politician, said even during her campaign that she would veto legislation to overturn right to work. The Trump administration is fighting to make sure that folks who work overtime, more than 40 hours in a week, take home less money. Under the Biden administration, the Labor Department expanded to bring the regulation into the more historical standard, the number of people eligible for overtime protections. Specifically, the Biden administration raised the salary floor at which you can be considered an overtime exempt management employee from $35,000 $50,000 a year to $58,000 a year. The rule was estimated to impact millions of workers and secure tens of millions more for workers in take-home pay, along with reduced working hours. The Trump administration just rolled back that rule, bringing the floor back down to $35,000 per year, meaning that your employer can now, in 2026, call you a, quote, management employee, pay you as little as $35,000 a year, and force you to work for more than 40 hours in a week without any more pay at all, much less time and a half. If we missed anything, let us know at tvlr.fm/contact, and we'll include it in next week's roundup. There's a lot more that we didn't get to on the radio, so if you would like to see the exhaustive version of Last Week in Southern Labor, then subscribe to the newsletter at tvlr.fm. Hamilton Nolan is our guest. Really excited to be talking to him today. Hamilton, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report.
Thanks for having me, man. Glad to be on the best labor show in the South.
That's right. Not too much competition, although there is another Union Talk radio program, not just in the South, but in Alabama now. Our friends at the River Region Labor Council in Montgomery about 6 months ago started a union radio program there. So excited to see that more people are doing similar things here in the South. But yeah, really excited to have you on the program. We're going to be talking about union now. But before we did that, I want, and sort of as a preface to it, because it's a good segue into talking about this new organization. You know, a lot of your work over the past several years has been about building the labor movement, been about the importance of building the labor movement into a stronger force. Why is that something that you are so invested in?
You know, over 20 years in journalism, writing about just the many problems with American society and why American society and its politics don't work, I came to understand that the inequality crisis that this nation is in has kind of broken America in some serious ways, has led to a lot of the political problems that we see today. So the more I understood that inequality was sort of the overarching problem that we have, I also came to understand that unions were the single most effective tool that regular people can access to really fix that inequality crisis in their own life. And unions in the nation as a whole can really bend the curve on inequality. And they're the only things that can. You know, the government's not going to do it, and rich people aren't going to do it for us. And so unions are really the only game in town if we are taking seriously the need to fix this huge crisis of economic inequality that's been going on my whole life. And so when I came to understand those sort of basic dynamics, it became clear to me that, look, wow, you know, rebuilding the labor movement and rebuilding organized labor and spreading unions is such an important job, not just for unions and not just for working people, but for the whole country if we ever want to have a balance of power economically, politically, and socially in this country ever again.
Yes. I mean, I came to that realization similarly, and you know, it's something that you and I, unfortunately, I think, you know, we're in the minority. I've read some of your writing about how the union stuff that you write, you know, you write about a lot of stuff. You write about politics, you write about culture, and you write about unions. And, you know, as far as the kind of importance level of the things that you do, you rank the labor and union stuff sort of at number one. And yet those sorts of stories are much less interesting to people for some reason than kind of just general politics stories or culture stories. And I'm curious, you know, one, why you think that is, and two, how labor communicators like you and I can try to make union stories maybe a little bit more interesting and engaging to people.
Right. I mean, you know this well, and every labor journalist knows the struggle of like you kind of understand how important this stuff is, and then you try to get the general public to be as interested in it as we are, and it's always a challenge. I mean, I really try to write about labor and approach it from a way of this is important to all people, and not to fall into the trap of being like unions are a niche and I'm writing to people who are already in unions or who are interested in unions for some reason, because as you know, that's, only 10% of Americans are in unions. Right. And so it's easy, I think, for the general public to be like, hey, I'm not in a union. What does this stuff have to do with me? And it's our job as the writers to kind of connect those dots and be like, look, if you work for a living, this stuff is super important to you. And, the fact that you don't have a union is a big, big story in your life, even if you're not perceiving that, so right. I'm always trying to take the blinders off people and be like, look, these things are important to you, even though unions have collapsed to the point that people don't think about them, we need to put them back on people's radar, and the absence of them should be on people's radar. So, I mean, that's the perpetual challenge. And as you know, sometimes it works and sometimes it's a struggle, man.
And there are any number of ways to try to fix that problem. And one of them that I think that the only place that I've ever read about this policy is in your work. It must exist somewhere else, but I've only seen you talk about it, and that is government funding of union campaigns. And a couple of months ago, congressional candidate Claire Valdez in New York added that to her policy platform. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. Why should the government fund union organizing, and how could that kind of get us to a place where, more people are talking about unions, more people are organizing, and we're building working class power?
Question. I love this. It doesn't get a lot of attention, unfortunately, but the basic challenge to expand, getting more people into unions and organizing unions at the scale of millions more working people getting in unions is, organizing unions takes resources. You have to hire organizers, you have to spend money. It just on a baseline level, it takes a lot of unions. And so one of the questions that we all have, if we care about the labor movement, is where's that money going to come from? Some of that money can come from existing unions. They can increase their organizing budgets. That's one way. But the National Labor Relations Act says that the job of the government is to facilitate collective bargaining. Now, how are you going to facilitate collective bargaining for the working class of America if they don't have unions, right? You need a union by definition in order to have collective bargaining. And so it is not crazy to say, look, a government that takes seriously its job of facilitating collective bargaining for the working class of America should naturally help us organize unions, get all these workers, the 90% of people who don't have unions, into unions so that they can engage in collective bargaining. It is not crazy. And solving that challenge of where we're going to get the money to organize all these unions, I really want the people inside the labor movement and who care about the labor movement to take this seriously, because when you bring this up, a lot of people on the union side will have kind of a knee-jerk reaction, and they're like, we don't want the government to be, we want to maintain this distance, this arm's length distance with the government, which is understandable. But what we're talking about is funding to organize unions. And every interest group in the United States of America, from corporations to nonprofits to every type of political interest group, tries to get money from the government, for its priorities. You don't think Amazon is getting money from the government for its priorities? The corporate world is already doing this. That's why they have lobbyists. That's why they buy politicians. They are getting money from the government. I'm talking about getting money from the government to support union organizing at scale. And as you said, Claire Valdez, who's running for Congress right now from New York, has that in her platform, which I think is a great start. So at this point, I would just like people to think seriously about where are we going to get the X billions of dollars that it's going to take to really do union organizing at the scale we need to do. That's going to start changing this country in a serious way.
Another policy, and this is one that I've never seen anybody talk about, despite the fact that this policy actually was the policy of the U.S. for the defense industry in World War II. And that is, I think that a key reason that, there's just so much inertia that everybody is subject to, right? And so the inertia of working people, for 90, as you said, 90% of working people don't have a union. So their inertia is that they're not going to have a union tomorrow. If the opposite were the case, if it just were the case that 90% of people were in unions or collective bargaining were the norm for 90% of people, then that would be the thing that people would be used to and they would be support and that they would support and be a part of. And so I've thought about the idea that collective bargaining, rather than being an option, is mandatory, particularly for like federal government contractors. And which is just to say that, if you get a federal government contract, you have to collectively bargain over the terms of, at the very least, the work that you're performing on this contract for the government. And that can look like, and the way that happened under the National War Labor Board in World War II was just that the workers elected a committee that would then negotiate with the company, and then the committee could decide if they wanted to affiliate with a union or not. But it just instituted collective bargaining as the default rather than individual bargaining as the default. And I don't hear anybody talking about that, but I'm curious what you make of that as a policy.
No, it's a great idea, and as you point out, I mean, when union density was highest in the history of the United States of America was right after World War II, and that wasn't a coincidence. A lot of it was because the government kind of came to an agreement with the unions of this country and a lot of people were funneled into unions as part of the defense production around World War II. Yeah, I mean, I would support that in a second. I think that that is some version of sectoral bargaining, union contracts covering entire sectors, people automatically being put into unions rather than forcing people to organize unions shop by shop. All those things would be great improvements in America. And, as you know, and I know, like, the labor laws in this country are extremely biased against being able to build and maintain strong unions. So there's a ton of reforms on the legal side that would be excellent and which could help us spread unions. My baseline assumption politically is that we are not going to get those things. It's sort of like passing the PRO Act. Yeah. It would be great for us to pass the PRO Act. And if we could do that, a lot of things would be different. But we haven't done it, even through Democratic administrations, even through Democratic Congresses. Notice that labor law reform has never been passed. So I feel like I spend more time thinking about how can we organize in the environment we have now, which will take a lot of money. Whereas, hey, if we can pass great labor law reform, then great. We can have a much easier conversation about these things.
One more question while we're still in the kind of fantasy land of, collective bargaining as the default rather than individual bargaining. We had somebody in the chat ask what you think the role of government employee unions like AFGE and AFSCME could or should be in pushing for labor law reform, in pushing for sort of good governance. And that also reminded me that, the Federal Unionists Network has, they've sort of toyed with this idea of, government workers putting forward basically a policy platform of like, hey, if government workers were running the government, this is how we would serve the American people, government for the common good. And so, I know that obviously those unions are sort of kind of fighting for their life right now, and it's difficult to say how much they can or should devote towards, pie in the sky policy changes, but I'm curious how you would think through that or what your response to that is.
I mean, there's no question that be better to have a bunch of AFG workers run the country than the people currently running the country. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question because in a democracy, there are, people will say in a democracy, you need the government workers to be responsive to what the democratically elected government is telling you to do, which is a reasonable position. On the other hand, you need people to have union rights. I think that one thing we've seen during the course of the Trump administration is that public sector unions, particularly AFG and other federal unions that don't have the right to strike, have gotten their ass kicked. And it really, I think, needs to make all of us in the labor movement sit back and seriously think about what it means to have a union without the right to strike. Because effectively,
right.
what it has meant under the Trump administration is that those unions have just gotten steamrolled and have effectively no power. You know, all the federal unions that had the Trump administration come in and tear up their union contracts and dissolve their unions unilaterally, and there was no strike, there was no meaningful response other than lawsuits, you know, which aren't nothing, but legal power is not the same thing as labor power, you know. And so I think that we really, as a labor movement, need to take a hard look in the mirror and say, going forward, when we get the chance to start rebuilding our public sector unions after we get these people out of the White House, let's talk seriously about the right to strike for public sector workers, because we have just seen a demonstration of the fact that not having the right to strike and not having the ability to pull off a strike, you know, has led to a very, very bad place for millions of federal workers in this country.
So coming back down to reality, you know, you said you've spent, you try to spend more time thinking rather than, you know, what would the ideal labor law situation in the United States be? You try to think about how can we organize in the environment that exists now, and Union Now is an organization that tries to tackle that question. It tries to be, as I understand it, the missing link between the fact that 70%, 60% of American workers would vote yes in a union election tomorrow if one were held, and the fact that basically no new unions are being formed. And so, and you've reported on this, and you've actually, you know, also been in some of the formational talks of this group, which is not to say you have any, leadership role in this organization, but that you've been a part of the conversations around the founding of Union Now. And so can you talk a little bit about the organization? What's its deal? What exactly does it hope to do?
Yeah, I wrote a book called The Hammer a few years ago, and Sarah Nelson, the head of the Flight Attendants Union, is one of the main characters in the book. And she talked throughout, you know, as I was reporting this book, she talked a lot about wanting to start a new organization to kind of help supercharge organizing, union organizing in this country, because, you know, anyone who has thought about trying to expand union organizing in this country, you know, when you start dealing with things like the AFL-CIO and unions, like it can always be a struggle, and it can be very bureaucratic. And one thing that's always been missing, I think, that I've seen in my reporting over the years is like, there's all this private sector money, there's all this philanthropy money, there's all this donor money, there's all these do-gooder money of people who want to fix America's problems. But almost none of that money goes into actually organizing unions. Almost none of that money goes into actual union fights, right? We have a lot of sort of labor associated nonprofits that do great work. And I've supported many of them, from think tanks to worker centers to independent union campaigns, you know. But there's not like one pipeline where you can say, hey, if you're a person who wants to donate money, we can put this money directly into union fights and union organizing. And that, I think, is what Union Now is trying to build. You know, we're basically trying to just build a pipeline of funding that will go right into the most meaningful and impactful big union fights in America. So organizing drives, big organizing drives like Delta, which is the biggest, you know, union organizing campaign in the country right now, Amazon or REI or Starbucks, or you can think of big, hard union fights like that. You know, can we funnel funding into these fights where you can help more workers participate in the organizing, you know, which is one of the big limiting factors, is like, how many workers can you pay to take a day off work to go organize their coworkers? You know, unions can only afford to pay for so much of that. But what if we had a funding pipeline where you could get more workers organizing? That's a big, big part of winning these campaigns. And also to serve as a de facto national strike fund, you know, is the thing that Union Now is aspiring to do. So can we raise money and have this money available to help workers when they go out on strike? Because, one of the reasons why so many workers either lose strikes or can't go out on strike in the first place is just pure economics. People
Right.
cannot afford to go without those paychecks. So what if we had a strike fund where we can support workers and allow them to go out on strike and allow them to win these hard strikes, to win these fights against really intransigent corporations? So Union Now is essentially trying to become a fundraiser that will put money directly into the heart of important union fights.
And so it seems like the aim is less around, of course they want small dollar donors and regular donors to support Union Now, but it seems like it's less aimed at that and more aimed at trying to pull down some of the, like you said, like the do-gooder money that goes around for these kind of various liberal causes and pushing that towards union organizing, which, you and I think that's, if you just generally want to make the world better, whatever your cause is, there are a lot worse things that you can do than push it to union organizing. Is that kind of the directionally where they're going?
Yeah, I think ideally it would be all the above. Bernie Sanders came and did a launch rally in New York. Zoran came out. So like those kind of people are interested in, because somebody like Bernie understands that we need this. Like this is an essential part of infrastructure. So I think Union Now will take small dollar donations, but it can also take big dollar donations. Right. I think they're going to go out and look at all the available funding that they can tap into, and it's important to say that like they're not going out here to take money away from other good labor causes that might get money from a foundation or something. Union Now is really a pipeline of money into union organizing and union fights. That's really all it is. So can we go out and go to these people that want to help America and don't know how to put money directly into union power? That's what it is. I mean, I have had countless people over the years ask me, because I write about unions, well-intentioned people will say, hey, I want to donate to help the labor movement, and how can I do it? And you can think of individual campaigns and individual fights where people can go, but you can never think of one place where you're like, this is a place you can give money, and that money will go to the most important union fights, period. And that's, I think, what Union Now is trying to build.
You talked earlier in the program about the need for really transformational organizing, and for something to be transformational, I mean, really we're talking about the scale of billions of dollars, millions of workers, and there have been organizations that have tried to sort of fill this gap, the same gap that Union Now is targeting. I'm thinking of Strike for Our Rights, and I'm thinking of EWOC, the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. But as I was prepping for the show yesterday, I went on their website and tried to identify sort of impact statements. And, Strike for Our Rights, they said that they had, supported thousands of workers in 21 unions on strike. And, that's great. And EWOC talked about, their impact statement had, hundreds of campaigns per year. And again, that's great, but it's not, transformational, right? Just as a fact of the matter, we can kind of look back and see that these organizations haven't been sort of transformational. Do you think that the fact that Union Now has this real establishment labor power behind it, the AFA, I think the UAW is supportive of it, as well as sort of the kingmakers in progressive politics like Bernie Sanders, AOC Mamdani, do you think that big support from those folks are gonna be able to help Union Now be different than these other organizations? Or, and if so, I guess, is that the thing that's gonna set it apart, or is it something else that I'm not seeing?
Yeah, I hope so. I'm obviously not a professional fundraiser, but groups like EWOC are fantastic, and I love EWOC. And again, I think that union people recognize that something like Union Now is an important part of infrastructure that really doesn't exist. Union Now is not the same as EWOC because it's not going out and having organizers. Union Now is trying to build a pipeline of money into union fights that exist, and if you think of the most important union fights in America, a place like Amazon, place like Delta, you're talking about places where thousands of people, thousands of workers have put millions of hours and millions of dollars already into trying to organize these companies, right? They're in a hard fight against big multi-billion-dollar companies. And it's important that we help them win these fights. You know, it would suck if at the end of all of the Amazon organizing, they never got a contract, right? It would suck if after years and years of trying to organize Delta, they never got a union. So can we help them get over the finish line? Can we give them more resources for organizing? Can we give them more resources that allow them to go on strike if they need to? Like, let's try to win the most important fights. I mean, these things are important to all of us. I don't work at Amazon and I don't work at Delta, but as a member of the labor movement, it's very important to me that those people have everything they need to win those hard fights against big corporations. So I think tapping into any resources and money that we can get out of the private sector to help unions is an important thing that needs to exist.
Unionnow.org is where you can go to support. I guess my final question is, you and I, we both agree that building the labor movement is one of the most important things that people can do to make the country better, to fix the imbalance of power in the United States and in the world. And at the same time, it seems like even people in the labor movement, so many of them are just, they'll say the right things about the need to build working class power, but it feels to me like in the vast majority of union spaces, people should be kind of running around like chickens with their head cut off, talking about how the sky is falling and we're going to be completely irrelevant in 10 or 20 years. And we got to start flipping tables. We got to figure out we got to do something different because we're going to die. We are going to die if nothing happens. And that's just, you've been in more union spaces than I have. That's like not the attitude. and I feel crazy sometimes being in some of these spaces. And so I'm curious, like, how can we, as people who do feel like the sky is falling, communicate that to other people in the labor movement and help them understand that they also need to understand the sky is falling?
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you. And I think the reason why I talk so much about the decline of the labor movement and the crisis that we're in is not because I want to be negative, right? It's not because we don't appreciate all the heroic stories that there are in the labor movement. It's because we see what the labor movement could be and what the labor movement should be and what it needs to be if we're ever going to have equality in this country. And once you start thinking in those terms, and once you start thinking about the big picture of the fact that it is the responsibility of the labor movement to balance out the power of corporate America. And then you look at the actual state of the world, and you can see in 1 second that we are not even close to being strong enough to do that. And that's what gives you that hair on fire attitude, and then you look at a chart of union density over the past century and you're like, wow, it's been going down and down and down for 80 years. And like, this is a big freaking problem for us. It's thinking about the big picture and always keeping in mind where we should be, where we can be, and where we have to get. As long as you keep that in mind, you will recognize that we're in a crisis and you'll feel the urgency to think big enough to get us out of this crisis. And I think, it's not just unions. I mean, it's human nature. People work and they have the work in front of them and they think about that and they often don't think about the big picture. And that is true in many parts of the union world. And I think that accounts for the lack of urgency that we see at the institutional level of the biggest, unions and a lot of the labor movement. Not all of it, obviously. I mean, I'm going to Labor Notes in a few weeks and there you're going to see the hair on fire, part of the labor movement will be there and just thousands and thousands of people. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of keeping in mind what our job is, what our responsibility is as a labor movement. The fact that responsibility extends to the entire working class, to millions of people who don't have our help yet, and that we need to keep that urgency in mind always, because we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Hamilton Nolan is the proprietor of How Things Work on Substack. You can read him at hamiltonnolan.com and read articles such as "The Business Community is Extraordinarily Stupid," as well as about how Mark Andreessen and others are out of touch, with a great picture of his dome head and more. Hamilton, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Thanks for your work.
Yep. We're going to take a break, folks. We will be right back with Boss Watch. The Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama local workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact April at our training center to start the process at 256-904-1753. No experience is needed. We offer free training, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is our mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by the Communication Workers of America. Learn more at cwa-union.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, better known as the UAW. They are one of the largest and most diverse unions in North America, with members in virtually every sector of the economy. UAW-represented workplaces range from multinational corporations, small manufacturers, and state and local governments, to colleges and universities, hospitals, and private nonprofit organizations. The UAW has more than 400,000 active members and more than 580,000 retired members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. You can learn more about the UAW and join at uaw.org. The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by Labor Notes. Labor Notes is a media and organizing project that has been the voice of union activists who want to put the movement back in the labor movement since 1979. You can learn more about Labor Notes at labornotes.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Union leaders, do you want a powerful website and mobile app built just for your members? The Union Active system, created by Unions America, makes it easy to share news and documents, send alerts, and keep your members engaged anytime, anywhere. Trusted by thousands of unions, Union Active streamlines communication so you can focus on what matters most, your members. With real-time updates, secure messaging, and custom features built for unions, you'll keep your members informed and engaged 24/7. Get Union Active today. Visit unionactive.com to learn more. Union Active, the ultimate website and communication system for unions.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor. You are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. He is down in Montgomery today. If you're also down in Montgomery, you can give us a call or leave us a voicemail. Let us know why you're going down there, 844-899-8857. You can also send a text to that number or a written comment to tvlr.fm/contact. The Chattanooga Times Free Press is reporting on a Chinese automotive supplier in Chattanooga that is laying off 153 people at its plant on Bonnyshire Drive. The Chinese automotive supplier is Yanfeng Automotive Interiors. It opened its facility in Chattanooga in 2017 to supply parts to VW. The permanent layoffs will take place on June 29th, according to the WARN notice. Companies are required to give notice to their employees and to the public when they're going to be laying off more than, I believe it is 30 or 40 employees, something like that. The company invested $55 million into its plant near Enterprise South Industrial Park with the expectation of employing about 325 people at full production. In 2016, the company said that its average salary would be $50,000 a year. The company didn't respond to a request for comment. They also talk about another manufacturer, supplier for VW, Adient, that is laying off 210 workers at its plant in Athens, Tennessee, and that facility will permanently shut down on June 30th. So not good. If you are listening or you know anybody that's working at either Adient or Yanfeng, and you would like to talk about how this is affecting you and your coworkers, we would love to hear from you. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Yeah, I mean, really, really hate to see things like this happen, especially when, these companies got tax breaks and stuff from the people of Tennessee. The article talks about how in 2016, Hamilton County Commissioners unanimously voted to provide Yanfeng a 50% tax break for 14 years. Didn't even get to the 14th year of production. A real shame. So if you're somebody that's affected by that, we would love to hear your story. You can give us a call whenever. Every week, every day across the South, workers are killed on the job, stolen from, discriminated against, or sexually harassed. And sometimes the employers are caught. These are last week's stories. This is Boss Watch. In Alabama, Quality Restaurant Concepts, owner and operator of approximately 60 Applebee's branded restaurants across the southeastern United States, will be paying $270,000 and provide other relief to settle a sexual harassment lawsuit, constructive discharge, and retaliation lawsuit filed by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. According to the lawsuit, the company failed to take appropriate action to address a sexually hostile work environment that harmed at least 6 female employees beginning in approximately April of 2023. The EEOC said the general manager of QRC's restaurant in Chelsea, Alabama, harassed female employees through unwelcome sexual comments, advances, offensive conduct, and physical contact. He and other management failed to stop other male employees and customers from doing the same. Despite receiving complaints of this conduct and the general manager's prior history of sexually harassing a minor female employee at another one of QRC's restaurants, the company failed to take appropriate action and allowed the general manager to continue working closely with young female employees. The company further failed to take appropriate action when a minor female employee complained about sexual harassment from a much older adult bartender. Multiple female workers subjected to this environment felt compelled to leave their jobs. Marcia Rucker, regional attorney for the EEOC's Birmingham District Office, said employers have a duty to protect young workers who are among the most vulnerable employees in the workplace, especially in the restaurant industry. By enacting strong policies and procedures to ensure that all complaints of sexual harassment are taken seriously and adequately investigated, employers can better fulfill their obligations under federal law to create a safe work environment free from harassment. The alleged conduct violated Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits sexual harassment in the workplace. The EEOC filed suit in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Alabama after first attempting to reach a pre-litigation settlement through its administrative conciliation process. In Tennessee, Magnera Corporation, formerly known as Berry Global, a Fortune 500 global manufacturer and marketer of plastic packaging products headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, will pay $130,000 and provide other relief to settle a disability discrimination lawsuit brought by the EEOC. According to the lawsuit, in January of 2022, Berry Global discriminated against an employee at its Old Hickory, Tennessee location by requiring her to produce a doctor's release clearing her to return to work after she took approved personal time off. Although the company's on-site certified physician assistant cleared the employee to return to work, the human resources manager demanded that the employee complete family medical leave paperwork even though she had not requested medical leave. The company fired the employee when she could not produce the requested paperwork. Later, during her deposition, the human resources manager testified that it was a violation of the ADA as well as the company's attendance policy to require the employee to produce a doctor's release clearing her to return to work after she took approved personal time off. Faye Williams, regional attorney for the EEOC's Memphis District Office, said the EEOC commends Magnera Corporation's willingness and commitment toward resolving this lawsuit and implementing measures to protect the rights of its employees with disabilities. The conduct violates the ADA, which prohibits discrimination based on disability and requires reasonable accommodation absent undue hardship. The EEOC filed its suit in U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee after first attempting to reach a pre-litigation settlement through its administrative conciliation process. Besides monetary damages for the employee, the 4-year consent decree settling the suit enjoins Magnera Corporation from engaging in any employment practices which discriminate against an employee on the basis of their disability in the future. The company must engage in the required interactive process to discuss reasonable accommodations as defined by the ADA. The company is also enjoined from terminating any employee for disability-related absences without considering a reasonable accommodation. The decree also requires Magnera Corporation to conduct annual training for its human resources personnel and supervisory staff involved in employment decisions at the Old Hickory, Tennessee facility on measures to prevent disability discrimination, including an explanation of the ADA, its prohibition against discrimination based on employees' disability or perceived disability, and responding to requests for accommodation. If we missed anything, you can let us know at tvlr.fm/contact, and we'll try to include it in the next roundup. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us in the YouTube chat. Praise the Sun said, before COVID, West Virginia teachers launched a successful statewide illegal strike. I wonder if there's anything from those models that other unions or workers could copy. And Union Gus says that Eric Blanc has a book called Red State Revolt that does try and unpack what happened and what the lessons are. And his second book, We Are the Union, tries to build on it to then talk about what things folks can do to build and reinforce their power by unpacking what went into an effective union campaign. Yeah, I mean, the Red State teacher strikes in 2017, 2018 were really, really cool. And there's definitely a lot to learn from that. And Red State Revolt is a good place to try to get some lessons. There were some teachers involved in those strikes that wrote a response to Eric Blanc that included some things that he did not include in his book. At least that's what I'm remembering of what they said. And I can't remember where it was. But I'm trying to see if I can find it real quick. Yeah, I think this is probably, yeah, here it is. So it's in New Politics, and the title is Social Movements Gave Rise to the Teachers' Revolt, Not Bernie. And so that's by Brendan Muckian Bates in New Politics. So if you want to, and he was one of the teachers involved in that. So if you'd like to take a look at that, and read Red State Revolt. I think that both are valuable. We got a great second half of the program lined up for you. We're going to be talking to a couple of building trades union representatives about data centers and why maybe they're not all that bad. So stay tuned for that conversation. It'll be good. We've also got UAW nurses and Minneapolis healthcare workers going on strike. Lots of really cool stuff. So find us online, Facebook, YouTube, at The Valley Labor Report to keep watching. But if you don't do that, we appreciate you taking the time to listen this week, and we'll see you next week. All right. We're off the radio. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
This is Overtime, a production of the Valley Labor Report, the largest union talk radio and online news outfit in the South, now broadcasting in Chicago and Minneapolis as well from the Tennessee Valley in the Spice Radio studios in Huntsville, Alabama. We are run by working people and for working people all over the country. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We appreciate you spending some time with us. If you'd like to call in or leave us a voicemail, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also send a text message to the same number or a written note to tvlr.fm/contact. We've got some really great news. Speaking of Chicago, we have some really, really good news out of Chicago. Nurses at the Ford Chicago Assembly plant persevere and they vote to join the UAW. This is a press release from the UAW talking about that win. So Local 551 is one of the most historic units in the UAW, and they go all the way back to the union's founding in 1935. Right now, over 5,000 of its members work at the Ford Chicago Assembly Plant, the automaker's oldest operating manufacturing facility. And yet, the nursing staff has never been unionized. So that was until April, when 6 nurses at the Chicago Assembly withstood a vigorous anti-union campaign from the company and voted to join the UAW. They talk about how it's a testament to the determination of the staff who had attempted to unionize in 2 previous efforts and came up just short in recent years. UAW Vice President and Director of the Ford Department, Laura Dickerson, said, "Every worker deserves to have a union. Every worker deserves to have the support they need to form their union if that's what they choose to do. Our decision to get behind these 6 workers really came down to that belief." One of the workers, Mary Kwasny, said she felt they needed more say in how their workplace operated, citing concerns about chronic understaffing and the company's lack of training opportunities as reasons for the organizing drive. She said, "We felt like management didn't want to make any type of financial investment in us that would allow us to increase our skills and our knowledge. We felt like we were understaffed, and that can have negative effects on the work that we do. We truly care about the workers in this plant, and we want to provide the best care possible for them when they come to us." Ford plant management was adamantly opposed to the nurses' efforts from the get-go and ran an aggressive intimidation campaign to dissuade them from organizing. The company held multiple one-on-one meetings with the nurses and distributed anti-union flyers filled with misleading information. UAW representatives made sure to hold multiple meetings of their own with nurses to counter the company's false messaging and were readily available 24/7 to answer any questions the nurses might have about what joining the union would entail. Throughout the drive, Local 551 leaders and members working at the plant continuously showed their support for the nurses, stopping by the medical department to offer positive words of encouragement, recording a solidarity video, and delivering support cards with messages urging the nurses to keep fighting. On April 9th, nurses voted 5-1 to join the UAW. Really excited. They're going to elect a bargaining chairperson and then begin negotiations with the company for their first ever union contract. And that nurse, Kwasny, said, "We're all very excited to be joining the UAW. Local 551 does so much great work in the community and holds a number of events for its members every year, and now we get to be part of that. We're very happy." So really exciting news there. The nurses at the UAW's, at Ford's Chicago Assembly Plant are now going to be union. Really exciting stuff. If anybody would like to call in, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. We talked about this during Last Week in Southern Labor, but we could talk about it a little bit again because it's so crazy. The Virginia governor, Spanberger, vetoed a bill that would have given public sector workers the right to organize. And it came on the backs of hundreds of thousands of working people in Virginia who work for the public sector who have been wanting to organize, and them fighting for this at the in the legislature for years, and it finally got passed. And when it passed, the governor sent it back with amendments that would have diluted and delayed the implementation of the bill. And she talked about this in her statement about the veto, Governor Spanberger did, saying that she wanted, the reason for those amendments was that she wanted a few groups of workers to be able to organize first to, quote, and I'm not kidding you, to, quote, demonstrate efficacy of this new system, end quote. I mean, that is the most ludicrous thing I have ever heard. As if for one, workers needed to demonstrate efficacy of their right to collective bargaining. Just the most pompous, out of touch, elitist thing to say to working people who want to have the same right as their sisters and brothers in the private sector to organize, that you have to prove to Governor Spanberger that it is efficacious enough to her for you to have collective bargaining rights. I mean, asinine, completely absurd. And so she was like, oh, you know, and so that's just the moral thing of it. It's absurd, but also as if like half the states in this country don't already have public sector collective bargaining, including the state of Florida. And so, you know, by not allowing their workers to collectively bargain, Governor Spanberger is content with allowing the state of public sector labor relations in the state of Virginia to be behind Governor Ron DeSantis's Florida. Insane. Absolutely, completely unjustifiable. And on top of that, I mean, yeah, you know, Virginia workers have to demonstrate efficacy, even though you can look right now at workers across the country who are already bargaining collectively in the public sector and see, you know, what the results of that are. And it's fine. Completely absurd. And rightfully, unions, the labor movement in the state of Virginia, are really upset about it. Classifying this as a betrayal, saying that this is terrible, saying that workers are going to remember this. And, you know, on that, I have to say that it should not come as much of a surprise as it has, because Governor Spanberger, let's remember, a CIA spook, right? I mean, you know, from the CIA caucus of the Democrats, said during her primary campaign, which I don't think she had a primary opponent, but still, it was during the primary. It was before the primary elections were even held. She said on video that she would veto a repeal of right to work. So, you know, I mean, it's not. It really should not come as much of a surprise to the labor movement in Virginia as it appears to have. And, you know, and I've seen some people. There are some people in some of the comment sections of some of the unions who were lambasting her about this, saying, "Yeah, well, you endorsed her, you know, so what did you get out of that, right? You know, and so don't you feel silly for endorsing her?" And I think that sort of engagement with the unions on this issue is just a tiny bit misguided, but not that much, because so many of the unions in Virginia not only endorsed her over and against her Republican opponent, who obviously would have not only veto, I mean, there would have been no question about how a Republican governor in Virginia would have responded with respect to this bill. But not only did Virginia unions endorse her in the general election over and above her Republican opponent, which is like, if we're just talking realpolitik, which is what we kind of have to do, makes sense. They endorsed her very, very basically as soon as she announced. And I think the value of that decision should really be questioned by rank and file workers in the state of Virginia who saw their unions the second that Spanberger announced her campaign endorse. You should really be questioning your leadership's decision on that front. And the leadership, I would encourage you to also think through, the value of just immediately going in and endorsing, somebody who comes from the CIA caucus of the Democrats, right? Not to say that you shouldn't endorse over and above the Republican, but does it make sense to be so gung-ho so early for somebody who is at the same time saying that she is going to veto a repeal of right to work? The SEIU, in their statement condemning her veto of the public sector collective bargaining legislation, though, pointed out that this, and I didn't realize this, but the ban on public sector collective bargaining in the state of Virginia came as a response to black hospital workers in the state of Virginia trying to organize. So, really, and just like right to work laws were in many cases at least very largely in part due to racism and racist hysteria, so was the ban on public sector collective bargaining in the state of Virginia. So, really bad, absolutely, completely unjustifiable by Governor Spanberger. She should be ashamed. And, unions are saying out loud that they're basically kind of rethinking their relationship with the governor, as I think makes sense and as they should. We have our guests in the Zoom, Ryan Pollock and Kevin Pranis. Ryan is the executive director of the Texas State Building and Construction Trades Council, and Kevin is the marketing manager for the Labor's International Union of North America, LIUNA, in Minnesota and North Dakota. Kevin and Ryan, welcome to the Valley Labor Report. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Really looking forward to this conversation. I enjoy being a contrarian, so I appreciate being given the opportunity to do that. Because, I saw a poll I think it was just two or 3 days ago, that said 70% of Americans oppose a data center being built in their backyard, in their neighborhood. And there's a lot of people who are... there are a lot of reasons to be concerned about data center development, and we're going to talk about those. But as I see it, those are basically on two grounds. I think one of them makes a little bit more sense to me than the other. On the first, it's really less opposition to data centers as physically, right? It's more in opposition to AI as a technology and its potential impact on the labor market, AI and its use to surveil, et cetera, right? And the second is opposition, to the effects of data centers themselves, like physically, pollution, strain on the grid, higher utility prices, et cetera. And so I do think that as building trades folks, you mostly engage on this issue around the second concern, which I am totally aligned with you on. I think that so much of the physical concern about data centers is really is overhyped. There are ways to mitigate it, even though there are real concerns, and we're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about how we can mitigate them. But I'm curious how you deal with the first concern, because as it relates to policy proposals like Bernie Sanders' national data center moratorium, when he announced that, I was expecting it to be primarily around kind of the physical nature of the data centers, but he really framed it more around the effects of AI on the labor market, AI as a technology, rather than, data centers' physical effects on the environment and people's utility bills. So, Ryan, I guess we can start with you. I'm curious how you engage with this issue of AI as a technology and its impacts on the labor market.
So we're still having these discussions right now in labor amongst each other, because we're all going to have different points of view on how this affects us and different experiences with this. But really, just like anything else, these are policy issues. If this is going to be displacing work, that's kind of a thing. One of our objects that we look forward to is reduced hours of labor. But if that's also going to be happening, we need to make sure that workers are getting a piece of that. We have a stake in this. We're at the table. I'm talking about things like sovereign wealth funds, but again, we're still really figuring out the demands on that side. But the answer usually, as any other time, is unions organizing and making sure that we have good policies in place. But the problem there is the same problems we've always had. It's systems,
Right. And so it's, when we're thinking about, I guess what you're saying here is when we're thinking about AI as a technology, its impact on the labor market, these are policy and political discussions that should be taking place and that the building trades are a part of. The AFL-CIO actually has, really good stuff on kind of guardrails for AI as a technology, but it really should be a separate conversation from, do we build data centers? Is that right?
If I could just speak to that, I think absolutely. And I think the one thing is that I've really noticed about working within the building trades is I think building trades have one of the best models in the country for how to integrate new technologies in ways that enhance productivity, but that also benefit workers, right? Where workers get their fair share of those gains. And so in our industry, there's all sorts of labor saving technologies, starting from just having operating engineers on machines instead of just laborers down in the dirt, carrying everything and lifting everything. And so with each of those gains, tilt up walls, for example, tilt up walls for instead of masonry walls, it saves a lot of labor. That means fewer jobs, but it also means you can pay more for the people who do those jobs. And that's the sort of thing that we all need to be thinking about as a society. How can we make sure that those technologies are used appropriately and that they're actually the benefits are shared with everybody rather than just going to the folks in charge? And that's the area where I think the effort to have site fights to sort of stop physical facilities, on the one hand, doesn't accomplish anything in terms of regulating or even moving the discussion forward on the actual policy question. It ends up being a big distraction and sort of a waste of resources when we really need, to use the political leverage we have to be tackling the AI question, not the would we have a warehouse full of computers in this state or that state or another country.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really makes a lot of sense. And Ryan, I don't know if I cut you off earlier there, if you had anything else to say on this.
No, I think that nailed it. It's the AI that I really see that people have the problem with. It's not the data centers themselves, aside from typical issues that you have with any construction project. I think that's a big issue. But again, there's a lot of misinformation out there. People are stopping short of saying that they're eating babies in them.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And the AFL-CIO, like I said, they do have some really good policies and around AI as a technology. And they just released some polling that showed that 9 out of 10 Americans support some of these policies. And so one of them is requiring a human to be the final decision maker on any issues that affect individual workers and their employment. 95% support. Guaranteeing workers have access to training and educational programs that build on existing knowledge, fighting back against uses of AI that advance misinformation, advancing guardrails against harmful uses of AI in the workplace. There are several others. You can find it. You can Google AFL-CIO, Workers First AI policy initiatives. But, I think that those are, talking about those in the political context just makes so much more sense, like you said, Kevin, than talking about National Data Center moratorium or especially site-by-site moratorium. If we have goals, we should just put the goals forward rather than saying let's stop and then let's do the goals. Well, why don't we just have the goals and just do them? Just tell the industry to do these things.
And that's what we're seeing. Like, we're seeing communities organize in places around Texas that we've never seen organized before, particularly in rural communities where a lot of these sites are. And they're organizing and they're shutting down these sites, and that's a real exercise of power. It's really impressive. However, that developer, that the buyers for that data, they still want that built. So it's just going to go somewhere where the community is less organized, and they're just going to get rolled there. But that community that did organize to shut that down and exercise that power, they had the power to also make real demands to where that data center could be built responsibly. And that can happen. It's not some technology that we're waiting on in order for this to happen. We can build these responsible today, and that requires early community engagement. We're already seeing this with closed loop cooling systems now because people were upset about water. And so now closed loop systems effectively bring that daily water use down to zero. And so these are kinds of things that we should be demanding and making sure that, individual ratepayers aren't paying for all the added energy costs and all that. We can do that.
I want to put a pin in that for just a moment, and before we come off of the kind of like AI as a technology conversation, because Kevin, you mentioned in our email conversations, there's so much talk rightly about AI technology as something that's disruptive and scary, and that we should want to put guardrails on, and especially in our spaces in union and maybe progressive political spaces, a lot less about the potential for AI's positive effects as a technology. What are some of the things that you're seeing that make you potentially hopeful for AI as a technology?
I think there's two areas, and we, my family recently did our first European vacation last year. My wife was using ChatGPT for all sorts of research on kind of where places to go, things to do, et cetera. Right? I mean, I think a lot of people have that experience, and I haven't heard anyone say that that's terrible. They think that's sort of destroying vacationing, and so I think there's very basic ways that in our lives. It's essentially a research assistant. It's as if you had an intern or research assistant who could go out and do a bunch of work, and the more that it advances, the more they can do. And so I think in the workplace, there's two things. One, there's ways to improve the way work happens that can be done because you can just increase 10x or 100x what research you can do. And so health and safety is one of those, where health and safety improvements require information. And the more detailed information you have, like how did those injuries happen? What was the weather? What was the circumstances? Where were all those details? And we've seen companies invest a ton in health and safety to try to improve it by gathering tons of data, but that's very labor intensive and costly. And a lot of companies just aren't willing to spend the money. If you can use AI to accelerate that and make that cheaper, you could actually get meaningful identification of here's how people are getting hurt and here's how we can sort of fix that. And so that's a way that I think potential for positive. The other is, as a union organization, I'll give you one example. We have so many problems that require better and faster information, and we just don't have the resources to go get it. So we have a bad contractor. I'm sure Ryan's quite familiar. The bad contractors are like bad pennies. They show up everywhere. They, messing up one time and another, getting violations, getting people hurt, messing up jobs. But it's so difficult to track where they are. Because construction is so diffuse. And so they just keep showing up on a public project, and you come to them and they say, well, this contractor used a child on a school project. Maybe you don't want them, and it's already too late. And so the idea that we could be drawing that information, have AI searching, for example, public bidding lists, right, from all different cities and counties and school districts to see if a bad contractor's name pops up so we could warn them about the bad experiences that others had. Those are incredible tools. We just don't have the staff to chase after these. And so that's certainly what we're trying to figure out is how can we use this, to really make our work more efficient so we can actually raise standards and protect workers and the public more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still struggling with how to utilize it to improve my workflow, but I was able to do something that really helped me. I'm the president of Labor Council here in North Alabama, and so we were helping with the letter carriers food drive, and as I was helping unload the trucks, all the stuff that had been donated that day, I was thinking about all the ways that we could improve it and increase participation next year. And so I wanted to kind of type it all out and send a plan to the letter carriers union. And if I had done that myself and done up a Word doc, it would have taken me probably, at least 4 or 5 hours. But I was able to, over the course of 10 minutes, just dictate it to, all of the word vomit that I had in my head to an AI tool, and say, give me something that looks like presentable. And so it kind of took my ideas and arranged them in a way that made more sense. So that's one thing that I've been able to do recently. But yeah, lots of opportunities for it to actually be good, potentially. And so, moving from the political and the policy question of AI, how to deal with it as a technology, moving to the second concern, the kind of the physical existence of data centers in people's communities, because so much of the conversations around data centers really have, unfortunately, Bernie Sanders was trying to elevate the conversation, I think, but so much of it is sitting around in this really, I think, baser second level. And, there are real negative impacts that can happen when it's not done with strong protections for workers in the community. And I think some of those stories are animating a lot of this like blanket opposition, because folks don't hear about the good stories like you were talking about, Ryan. But, maybe for folks under a rock, Ryan, could you talk to us about like what are some of the concerns physically that people have with data centers when they're built without any of these protections?
Well, we have a site in Taylor, Texas, just outside of Austin, that people thought was supposed to be for parkland, and then it ended up being for a data center within by about 500, 600 feet. That's disappointing, understandably frustrating, and people's electric utility bills are going up, and we do have concerns about water here in Texas, but like I said before, that's now being mitigated. And there are a lot of people say, well, these are temporary jobs and it doesn't produce that many jobs. Well, as a construction worker, that's our livelihood. Those aren't temporary to us. That's how we operate, and if we have good standards there, like local hire standards, then that takes care of that local community. So you're not having a lot of people coming from elsewhere to build, and that local community benefits. You're developing the workforce. You're not increasing housing costs. I'm seeing housing costs rising because of all these workers coming in and displacing local residents. But if you have local hire requirements, then that definitely takes care of that, while creating long-term jobs. And they do create long-term jobs, and it may not be that many for a large urban area, but for these rural areas where they are being built, that is really transformative. Anywhere from 10 for a very, very small one to over 100 for the larger ones, and those are high quality jobs. So ones that didn't exist in these towns that didn't have a whole lot of opportunity before. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's not how it seems.
Right. Yeah, Kevin, I'm curious how you would engage on that question.
I think that, look, the data centers caught folks off guard, right? And I think you had a combination of concerns about billionaires, about AI, right? About sort of the not in my backyard type opposition. I've attended, 60, 70 hearings for different kinds of energy and data center projects over the last decade. And the concerns are very similar. If you're looking at a cornfield, a lot of people who looked at a cornfield across the way in their neighbor's yard, they don't want to look at anything else, right? They don't want to look at a solar farm. They don't want to look at a data center. And so I think there's lots of concerns. I would say, data centers are basically just large warehouses with computers in them. And without the truck traffic that you normally associate with like a distribution center. And so the main impact that's different from any other typical kind of development really on the electric use. Even the water use, I think, is overstated compared to other types of water uses, like a big suburban high school, right? Or a golf course is using water comparable to a lot of data centers. And with closed loop, it can be considerably less than that, more like a car wash or less amount of water. And then obviously light and noise and construction activity. People have different feelings about property values going up. Some people like that because that helps their property. Some people don't like that. But I think we're seeing the same challenges we see for any kind of development. One important point, I think, here in terms of the electric bill impacts, those impacts can be really positive. So in Minnesota, we're looking at 2 data centers potentially saving other ratepayers $1.7 to $1.9 billion over 15 years, because they will bring in so much new revenue that helps support the system as well as investing in clean energy. And so, whether your bills go up or down, that entirely depends on how it's being managed by your local regulators, right? Especially in states that have regulated utilities like Minnesota. And so, you can control those impacts and you can make sure that that's beneficial. It's also the same thing we'd have to do if we electrified vehicles. And we've heard a lot of advocates talk about we should need to electrify our whole economy. Well, that's what happens when you electrify your economy. Demand for electricity goes through the roof. And in a place where you're dependent on the market, the cost of electricity goes up, right? But that's just a feature of electrifying. And we better figure this out if we're actually serious about meeting climate goals. Data centers actually help us, accelerate that path to figuring out how to supersize our grid.
That's something that I've always, and I read an article about this, and it seemed so intuitive to me that yes, in some places data centers are increasing people's utility bills, but that is just, it does not have to be that way. And actually, like you said, in Minnesota, it's not being that way because the data centers, you can basically impose upon them a requirement to pay for 100% of the infrastructure improvements that they require to get their electricity. And if you just do that, it doesn't increase electricity. And you can even say you have to pay for 110% or what. People can make decisions about these things to utilize the development for good. And like you said, the electrification of all of the other energy uses is going to require so much more electricity to be generated that the data centers could actually be really exactly what we needed to kick the utilities and the energy producers, kick them in the rear and get them to develop more, more generation capacity without hurting ratepayers.
Particularly here in Texas, like you took the words right out of my mouth. These are there are bridges that we can be building here and partnerships that we can be building. And these are things that we get out of early engagement with the community. And instead of fighting them, we can look to say like, okay, hey, how can we make this work where everybody wins? Because that's entirely possible. We just haven't tried it.
And as a concrete example on that point, not only we have Google coming in with 2 data centers, not only are they paying for, sort of like many hundreds of megawatts of wind and solar, but they're going to be helping invest in a 300 megawatt iron air battery, long duration storage battery. This is bleeding edge technology. If you're going to replace gas, right, as a firming resource, that's the only way you're going to do it with something like that. Ratepayers would never be willing to pay what it's going to cost to have a 300 megawatt iron air battery. And so the only way that we get that kind of innovation funded and technology deployed is somebody with deep pockets who's willing to go spend the money. And so for us, it's our best affordability tool. It's kind of our only affordability tool. It's also, after losing the IRA, we're getting more than half of what we lost from the IRA back from just 2 data centers in terms of clean energy investment and ratepayer savings. So this is our last chance. If we don't take this chance and it goes somewhere else, then we're stuck with rising bills and struggles, getting the clean energy on the grid.
And a lot of these bigger companies are doing a good job with engaging with everybody on this. Microsoft, they're doing great. They've got the money to spend and they're just like, tell us what you need from us, but they're not hearing it from folks. And so when they hear it from folks, they just need to know what we need, and that's what's missing in the conversation.
And so, when we're talking about, we've talked about a couple of protections specifically, like requirements for them to pay for infrastructure upgrades. But, specifically, Ryan, you mentioned that there was a community in Texas that was able to, that stopped a data center from being built, and how that was like a real sort of example of community power. And that it's really in one way, it's kind of cool to see the community exerting their power, but realizing that data center is just going to get built somewhere where the community is less organized and is less able to make use of the positives is really discouraging. So if you were in a place where a data center was being considered, what are the sorts of things that you would advise community leaders and union leaders in the area? How would you advise they begin to engage on the issue, and what are the sorts of protections that you think should be put in place for communities to accept data centers?
Speaking from construction, I'm going to prioritize project labor agreements. That's going to ensure fair wages, safe conditions, local hiring, local workforce development, which will benefit the community long term. strong workforce protections on good union jobs, investing in Department of Labor registered apprenticeship programs to expand the workforce, like I said, adherence to prevailing and living wages, higher of the two, I would say, responsible bidder requirements that prioritize worker first contractors, infrastructure and supply chains that are manufactured, built, operated, secured, and maintained in the U.S. with union labor, and assurances that all jobs related to data center development, maintenance, and operations are good union jobs.
Kevin, what about you?
Well, I second everything Ryan said. That's a great list. On the workforce side, and including, when we talk about workforce, this is also an opportunity to bring new folks into this work, right? So communities that are underrepresented in construction, big projects are a chance to bring in new apprentices to pursue construction careers that last long after one project's completed. In addition to that, I think in terms of energy resources, obviously it's important to understand from the utility and from the data center, like where's the power coming from? How does that work? What are the protections to make sure that those, if there aren't state law protections, then, you have to look deal by deal to say, okay, how is this going to impact our rates? I think it's important, but there's plenty of money to make it work. On the water use side, I think it's important to know the plan. Different places have different water constraints, right? There's a lot of places where, frankly, a golf course's worth of water is not necessarily a big deal, right? But I think you can plan. And one thing that everyone should ask for is not just electricity, but also on the water side. If you need new infrastructure, if there have to be upgrades to serve a customer, well, that customer should pay for those upgrades and maybe then some. Right? Usually you get a net benefit of that because they're paying for the upgrades and then they're paying a lot for the service, for the rates that pay for the whole system. And so, water infrastructure upgrades, questions to ask, about noise, figuring out what they're doing for noise. There's berms, there's engineering things that you can do to minimize noise, right? I think often it's sort of overstated. There's one in downtown Minneapolis that no one would ever know exists. That's in a, former office building. That's now a data center with a bunch of servers, and it's loud in that room, but you wouldn't even know from the outside. Lights, you could certainly, there's all sorts of mitigations. It's the same thing we've done for wind and solar and other kinds of large projects. You just work through the different impacts. And then I think you're looking for community benefits. You're saying, look, if we're going to have to drive by this, and maybe this wasn't what we wanted to look at, what are we getting for it in property taxes and contributions to schools, right? In donations to different organizations. Some places it's a community fund. Like Ryan says, it's really up to the community to say, what would we like fixed, right? What are we concerned about, and get that information there. But I would say if we can't do data centers, I don't know what we can do, right? I mean, I don't know how you do manufacturing, which has way more impacts than a typical data center, right? Or any other sort of thing that, hotels have impacts, schools have impacts. I think with each kind of development, you just have to work them through, make sure that your local requirements or state requirements are appropriate.
Kevin, you mentioned that so many of the complaints, quote unquote, about data centers are common across any sort of development, and actually other forms of development are going to have more disruptive effects in some ways. But one of the retorts that I hear and that Ryan mentioned earlier was that people say, like, oh yeah, there will be some jobs, there will only be like 100 for, a multi-billion-dollar data center long term, and we should basically just ignore the construction jobs, even though they're they can last for 5 to 7 to 10 years. And so, but how would you, and I'll go to you first for this, Kevin, but how would you respond to somebody who says, well, look, a manufacturing facility is going to have all of these disruptive effects, but it's going to support 500 jobs. It's going to support 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 jobs for the same price versus a data center is not. How would you respond to that?
Well, certainly, if I was in a community that was being offered a manufacturing facility, right, a multi-billion-dollar manufacturing facility in a data center, I might choose the manufacturing facility, more impacts, but also more jobs. But that's not the choice that's being offered, right? There's a limited number. And I don't know if anyone's looked at manufacturing facilities lately, but they don't look like they did 50 years ago in terms of how many jobs they take, because so many of the manufacturing processes have been automated as well. And so I think there's a sort of fantasy idea of what a factory looks like that doesn't correspond to what a modern factory looks like very much. we'd always love to see more jobs. But the nice thing with the data center is they're giving you an incredible tax base, right? That for the per acre tax base is unbelievable because you have all this expensive equipment. And I would say that actually looks a lot like a wind farm or solar, which are also not labor intensive to operate either. And so it's like, if you think a solar farm's good, right, or a wind farm is good because it brings in a bunch of revenue, right, without taking up too much land, well, a data center takes up even less land, provides a ton of revenue, and you can use that to make improvements in your community that you can use to attract other businesses. So you're not really choosing between, I don't think anyone's choosing between a data center or an equivalent manufacturing thing that would employ 10 times as many people. It's actually the opposite. If you do, you should be pursuing all of those options in your community. And in most communities, if there's land for a large data center, you can find land, within the area for a manufacturing facility.
Yes. I'm so glad that you meant, because that's exactly what I've thought. When I read these things, it's like, in what communities is the choice A or B? There's just not that many manufacturing facilities being built. And, I'm sure that if working people were the ones making the investment decisions, maybe we would make them differently, but we're not. It is the case that these huge companies are investing a lot in data centers. And so, we just kind of, you either take the data center or you don't, and somebody else does, is like the real question that I think that, sometimes people just don't want to grapple with. And we had somebody.
And if I could throw one more chip,
the
other is, look, the manufacturing doesn't happen on site. There's a ton of manufacturing happening to support data centers, right? That's now, whether it's generators or, the electronic components, the chip manufacturing, a good amount of that actually happens in the United States. And so you see, there's ripple effects from each data center is going to need, and they're going to be turning their chips over potentially every 5-6 years, right? So that's a huge amount of manufacturing demand. And so we should focus on making sure as much of that is domestic as possible, and that those are creating good jobs, ideally union jobs.
Yes. Yeah. And so we're getting a few kind of responses in the chat that I want to just read off to you so that, but I have responses as well. One, Glenn in the Den says the fact remains that a lot of these temporary construction worker jobs are by and large not by local residents. But that's just that's a problem that can be fixed. And, Ryan, you talked a lot about how in some of these agreements that y'all have been able to get in Texas, there are local hiring provisions, right?
Right. And that's a demand that people aren't making. Again, it's about using this as an opportunity to develop that local workforce, get local residents in apprenticeships where they have this good job in their town, where they have that available. Because if work like this isn't happening, then apprenticeships aren't happening either. They don't have that opportunity, then they have to leave elsewhere to go chase it. And that's why a lot of our towns are shrinking, because people are having to go follow opportunities. Well, now you have an opportunity locally. And if we're putting in and demanding local hire requirements, and we're ensuring local residents are getting that opportunity, and it's not going to people coming in from elsewhere.
Right. A dancing piece of bread asks, but why not use that land for housing or something? And I think, Kevin, that kind of speaks to your statement about the choices. The choices are just not in these communities. Are we going to build a social housing project or a data center? For one, it's like Google is not going to pay for a social housing project. That's just not, they're not in that business. And your local community is actually, your city council, if they wanted, it's a demand that you could make, right? And your city council could decide to use the increased tax revenue from the data center to build a social housing project, if that's something that we wanted. But if you don't have the data center, that's just not something that's on the table, it seems to me.
That exactly. That's the best chance that you have of having social housing or attracting housing is to attract more tax base. This is part of the tax base problem. Is the higher your taxes are, the less attractive it is to locate there. Bringing a data center is the single best thing you can do for your tax base, per square foot. So bring a data center and then, use that revenue to do whatever you want, or ask the data center company to help, co-invest in the housing, which, not speaking for any data center companies, but I'd be pretty surprised if you couldn't get some interest in that concept from them. They're very eager to find some way to demonstrate value.
Right. And Pittsburgh Dude 87 says, I don't want a data center anywhere near me. They suck up all the water and electricity. I think that we've already kind of talked about that. Again, these are problems that can be fixed with a data center. It's, you can have the data center pay for the improvements to the water infrastructure. And, staying on the increased tax base for a moment, there's a huge data center project that developers are trying to push through in Bessemer, Alabama, that, again, like so many of these others are facing a lot of community pushback. But, Bessemer is a majority black city. I think like 80% of its residents are black, super high poverty levels there. And the increase in the tax to the local schools alone are estimated to literally double the school's budget, and that's like, if nothing else happens, it seems to me like doubling the city school's budget is pretty good. And I just feel like so many of the articles that I read about it don't grapple with any of the things that the community could get if they just, instead of organizing, like you said, Ryan, to push it out, if they organized to kind of tame the data center rather than push it out. There's so much opportunity there, it seems to me, to do good for the community rather than not having it.
Not to mention all the good jobs it creates locally, and those are jobs that didn't exist there before. And then you have jobs not just for the data center, but for the infrastructure to serve the data center, and then the other services for the people who work there, and it just ripples out. It's just so clear.
Yeah.
To Ryan's point, that's great. So we look at it. I mean, we look at a data center project as like kind of 3 projects at least, because for every for every billion you're doing the data center, you're probably doing another 2 billion plus in energy generation resources. So we're building wind, solar, and batteries to support these data centers, so it's incredible. It's way more than just the jobs at the data center location.
And we've got somebody said that asked the residents in Memphis how they like the AI data centers. And there, I think you're specifically talking about Grok and the XAI data centers. And I think that's like one of the examples of where it has not been done well, right?
Yeah, they have every right to complain.
Yeah.
We're with them on that. I agree. That sucks. But what we're saying is we need to be making these demands that they be built better, and that communities are engaged early. That's not a good way to do it, but that doesn't mean that's how they're all going to be done.
Right.
And it's not specific to data centers, right? This is an Elon Musk problem, right? It is a bad developer. We've seen bad wind developers, bad solar developers, right? Bad pipeline developers. When they're bad, they do bad things. And so we should have strong laws, and we should do a good job of holding the bad actors accountable. And one problem with the moratorium push is it makes no distinction between, the companies, sort of like that are doing the best work on this, like a Google or a Microsoft. They're working extremely hard to produce like good outcomes versus, sort of an XAI. And they're completely different. And if we want them to be different, we really need to sort of focus on working with and promoting the best cases, and then going after the worst cases to sort of, force them to raise their standards. This is what we have to do in every industry.
Right.
We've had this with wind and solar, and we never went out and said, well, solar is a terrible industry because we had this one terrible experience with a developer that did all the wrong things, because that's the wrong takeaway.
Just like Kevin, with our contractors, we have good contractors and low road contractors.
Right. Kevin, you did mention this earlier, and I think this chatter didn't hear it, but just to give you a bit to specifically address the noise pollution problem, they said that that's a problem that's specific to data centers. Data centers are uniquely noisy as compared to other types of development. How would you respond to that?
No, the data centers are running a lot of computers and servers. And so there's a hum that comes from the servers. But I mean, if you compare that to like manufacturing or a refinery, right, or any number of other sort of uses, or a loud bar that's down the street, right, from you that has people stumbling out at, 1 a.m. on a regular basis, right? Like noise problems are not at all associated with data centers in particular. I think you look at what are the setbacks, you look at berms, buffers, there's all kinds of engineering things that you can do. And so, yeah, if you don't have standards, and if you allow companies of any kind to build a facility with no kind of noise protection, right, or if you're allowing them to run their own gas generators, all the time, and those gas generators are noisy, then that's a big problem. But that's a basic regulatory problem that isn't at all specific to data centers. And we have a member of ours who just built a meta data center in the suburbs of the Twin Cities, and he lives 300 yards away. He worked on the project, and now he lives there, and it's just fine, right? No, sort of no problems at all. And so, yeah, there are bad data centers, and we learn lessons, from a few of the bad examples, but every other data center then gets held accountable for that because they're hearing it in community meetings and they're having to prove, okay, we'll do noise testing, right? There's same thing with wind. We hear this all the time with wind turbines, that wind turbines are too loud. And that's why there's noise testing protocols, and there's limits on those, number of decibels. And there's lots of going out and testing, and lots of people who have learned to live with wind towers that they thought would be noisy and turn out not to be a problem at all.
Ryan Pollock is the executive director for the Texas State Building and Construction Trades Council. Kevin Pranis is the marketing manager for the Laborers International Union of North America in Minnesota and North Dakota. Ryan, Kevin, thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to us. I think that we've resolved the issue. I think that people are going to watch this, and there's not going to be any more controversy. I think that everybody's happy with us, and there aren't going to be any more problems anymore.
Good job, everybody.
Thanks for solving it, Jacob.
Kevin, Ryan, is there anything else that you wanted to say before we let you go?
No, man, I appreciate the opportunity.
No, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number, 844-899-8857 if you would like to call in. Appreciate those guys for taking the time to talk to us, and hope that we've at least, obviously I don't think that we've solved the issue, but I do hope that for people who are so kind of instinctively against data centers, I hope that I've been able to complicate the narrative for you just a little bit, because I think it should be complicated. At the very least, I think it should be a little bit more complicated than it is right now. Here's the last. Let's see. I got a few things that we could talk about here. Let's talk about this overtime rule, because this one is crazy. The Trump administration has been really riding on their passing of the overtime tax cut as a way to demonstrate that they support the Trump administration is the presidential administration for the working class, because they passed this overtime tax cut, which, unlike as you might think, you might think that what that means is that all money that you earn from wages after 40 hours in a work week is not taxed. That is not the case. It's only the half that is untaxed, right? So if you work over 40 hours a week and you're not exempt and you get time and a half, it is the and a half that is untaxed. Your time is still taxed. It's the and a half that goes untaxed. So it's actually a very, very small benefit. And they are really, really writing this to say that, oh, we're the working class party, working class president, because we're not taxing this and a half, while at the same time trying to take away something that is a much bigger benefit for so many more people in the overtime regulations that were updated by the Biden administration. And so specifically what the Biden administration did was, let me explain the overtime regulation. So the overtime regulations, not everybody qualifies for time and a half on wages on hours over 40 in a week. There are exemptions to that. And the exemptions are that if you are a worker who has enough, who a lot of your job is like management and self-directed and stuff, then you don't qualify for overtime, and you can work, and so that's called being a salaried employee, right? So salaried employees can be exempt from overtime if they have enough management roles. And so not only do they not get the salary employees, they don't get time and a half for hours worked over 40 in a work week. They don't get time for hours worked over 40 in a work week. They just get a set amount of money that they get every 2 weeks, no matter how much they work. And, so theoretically that could mean that they work 35 hours in a week and then they get the same amount of money. But everybody knows that the way that it works is you work more than 40 hours a week, but you still get the same amount of money. You don't get any extra money at all. Well, the rule was, before the Biden administration, that there's a salary floor on that. And the salary floor was $35,000 a year. Okay, so that meant that for your employer to exempt you from overtime protections, you had to not only had these job duties, but you had to be getting paid at least $35,000 a year. Because if you're getting paid less than $35,000 a year, then, it doesn't really pass the smell test that you're a fancy smancy employee who doesn't qualify for overtime. And so the Biden administration, that number had not been updated in years, in a long time. And so the Biden administration sought to increase that floor to $58,000 a year, which makes sense because really, especially now today in 2026, if you're not making more than $58,000 a year, it really is not right for your employer to not only not pay you time and a half, but to not pay you at all for hours worked to over 40 in a week, right? And so that's what the Biden administration said. They said, look, we got to bring this floor that's been so low for so long. We got to bring it up to $58,000 a year. And anybody under $58,000 a year, it doesn't matter what you do, you got to be paid for the hours that you work. And the Trump administration said, no, we want to make sure that the floor stays at $35,000 a year and take away this added protection from millions of working people, take away this added compensation of tens of millions for workers every single year to benefit employers, to put more of the money, more of the value that working people create in the pockets of billionaires and these huge corporations. And so now we are back to a situation where, by virtue of your employer saying that you have management responsibilities, they can pay you $35,000 a year and force you to work more than 40 hours in a work week, and not only not pay you time and a half, they don't even have to pay you for your 41st hour. Every hour that you do of work after 40 in a week, it can be free as long as you make $35,000 a year. I mean, it's just absurd. It's completely ludicrous. And as Union Gus in the chat says, it's exactly right. $58,000 is poverty wages in most metros anyway. And so now they can pay you $35,000, not pay you anymore. That's the Trump administration's policy for working class people. Adam called in about it. He had a couple of things to say. Let's play clip 3.
Hey, y'all. This is Adam with the Valley Labor Report, and we've got another reminder this week that if working people want protections, we've got to organize for them ourselves. The Trump Labor Department has officially scrapped Biden-era overtime rules that would have expanded overtime eligibility to millions of salaried workers. The rule would have required employers to pay overtime to a lot of salaried workers making under $58,000 a year, but after federal courts blocked it, the administration has now dropped the appeals and formally restored the much lower Trump-era threshold of around $35,000 a year. Now, look, politicians come and go, court rulings change, regulations get rewritten every few years depending on who's in power. But union contracts, those are something workers can fight for directly. That's why organized workers across this country bargain for guaranteed overtime protections and stronger pay scales and limits on forced overtime and real enforcement on the job. Because when protections only exist on paper in Washington, they can disappear overnight. But when workers are organized together, we can force the boss to respect what we've won. If you're tired of watching working people get jerked around every election cycle, then it's time to organize your workplace, support unions in your community, and build worker power where it matters most, on the job. Solidarity forever, y'all.
And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the program. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number if you'd like to leave us a voicemail. We'll try to play it on next week's program. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. We'll see you then.